They kicked him out. Just like that. No questions, no hesitation. The doors of the gleaming downtown branch of Lexington Federal Bank burst open as two security guards escorted a frail, scruffy black man out onto the cold concrete sidewalk. He stumbled slightly, gripping a worn duffel bag tighter against his chest as passers-by watched with mixed expressions of disgust and amusement. "I told you, sir. You can't be in here dressed like that," barked Kevin, the taller of the two guards. His blue uniform taut over his chest as he shoved the man a few feet farther from the steps. "This isn't a shelter, but I wasn't asking for—" "You heard him," cut in Marcus, the other guard, rolling his eyes. "Move along, before we call the cops." Inside, Claire Peterson, the branch manager, stood by the glass doors, arms crossed over her crisp white blouse. Her heels clicked sharply as she turned to her assistant manager, Kelly. "I want a note circulated to all staff," she said coldly. "If any more vagrants come in, don't even let them pass the reception desk. This is a bank, not a charity." Outside, the man adjusted his bag and brushed off his coat, threadbare and dotted with holes, and looked back at the building. There was no anger in his eyes, no fury, just a look of tired disappointment. He turned and walked down the sidewalk, disappearing into the bustle of the city. Earlier that morning, before the chaos, the bank had been its usual, sterile, efficient self. Claire had arrived promptly at 8:00 a.m. as she always did, stepping out of her silver Audi Avon and nodding at the valet who wasn't supposed to park her car but always did anyway. Her world was polished surfaces, well-pressed blazers, and clients who brought in portfolios worth millions. So when she looked up from her desk and saw him, a lanky, ash-haired black man in worn boots and what looked like 4 layers of clothing standing in the center of the lobby, she'd bristled. He hadn't even made it to the teller line. He was just standing there, awkwardly scanning the counters. "I think we have a situation," she muttered, tapping her desk phone. "Kevin, can you come up front?" The man had approached the customer service desk slowly, calmly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "I'd like to speak to someone about opening an account." The young woman behind the desk, a trainee named Dana, had hesitated. Her training hadn't covered this scenario. Okay, sir. Do you have 2 forms of ID and a current address?" "I've got my passport," he said, pulling out a small zippered pouch from his bag. "And I can provide a PO box address I've been using." Dana looked toward Claire, unsure. Claire didn't even wait. She walked over, heels clacking with purpose. "Sir, may I help you?" she asked, her tone laced with the kind of condescension that didn't need volume to cut deep. "Yes," the man said, not missing a beat. "I'd like to open a new account, possibly a high-value account. And I have some questions about services offered to large balance holders." Claire blinked. "Sir, we have private client services available, but I think you may be more suited to a community assistance center," she said with a forced smile. Kevin and Marcus appeared beside him like summoned golems. "Miss Peterson," Kevin asked. "You can escort this gentleman outside," she said. "He's clearly in the wrong place." The man didn't resist. He didn't argue. But as he was led out, he turned to her. "My name is Franklin Mays," he said. "You might want to remember that." Claire scoffed. "I doubt it." An hour later, the phone rang in Claire's office. She picked it up, half distracted by her emails. "Lexington Federal, Claire Peterson speaking." "Good morning, Miss Peterson. This is Cynthia Rowe, Executive Liaison for Mays International Holdings. I'm calling to confirm that the branch is ready for Mr. Franklin Mays' arrival today. He's scheduled to deposit a portion of his liquidity assets and finalize his transition into our private client division." Claire froze. "I'm sorry, did you say Franklin Mays?" "Yes. Mr. Mays prefers to conduct business in person and was quite specific about visiting your branch. He's an extremely private man, as you might imagine, given his net worth. I trust he was welcomed properly." Claire's mouth went dry. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. Let me check on that." She slammed the receiver down and stood up so quickly her chair toppled. "Kelly," she barked, "get security. Get Kevin. Now, outside, Franklin Mays was seated on the curb, not because he had to, but because the sun felt good on his skin. His bag sat next to him, a scuffed laptop poking out the top. He was going to give them 5 more minutes, and then he was going to walk across the street and open his new accounts at Argent Bank, where the regional VP had begged him personally. "Mr. Mays," Claire called out, breathless, heels clicking against the sidewalk as she and Kevin sprinted toward him. He looked up, calm. "Mr. Mays, I want to sincerely apologize for the earlier confusion. There was a miscommunication, a dreadful mistake." Franklin stood, dusting off his knees. "I don't think there was any confusion," he said softly. "I came in to open an account. You judged me before I said a word." No, that's not true. I watched you," he said. "I saw how you looked at me, like dirt, like a stain on your perfect white floor." Claire faltered. "I'm not looking for an apology," Franklin said. "I've dealt with worse. But you should know something." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded document. It was a printed confirmation, Lexington Federal's own letterhead, welcoming him as a platinum tier client and confirming a projected deposit of $28 million. "I was going to bring my portfolio here. Invest. Offer scholarships through your bank's charity arm. I liked the architecture. Thought maybe the people inside were just as polished." Claire's eyes widened. Mr. Mays. Please, this is not who we are." "Oh, I think it's exactly who you are." Franklin turned to Kevin. "You looked proud, throwing me out. Like it made your morning." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. I was just following orders." "Exactly." Inside the branch, the atmosphere had flipped. Dana sat stunned at her desk, watching as whispers rippled through the staff. Franklin walked back inside. Slowly this time, not escorted, not shoved. Customers stared as he approached the main desk again. "Miss Peterson," he said, smiling politely, "would you still like me to open an account here?" Claire looked cornered. Of course. Please, come with me to my office." He followed, head high, as the entire branch fell silent. In the office, she gestured to the chair across from her desk. Franklin sat and pulled out a silver tablet, unlocking it with his thumbprint. "I want to move $28 million into a variety of high-yield accounts," he said. "I also want to speak with someone about community investment partnerships." "But," Claire looked up nervously. "Yes, I won't do business with this branch," he said flatly. "Or with you." She froze. "I'll work with Dana," he continued. "She didn't judge me. She asked questions. She gave me a chance to speak." Claire's face turned red. She's just a trainee." "Then maybe it's time you learned from her." Word spread quickly. By noon, the regional director of Lexington Federal had flown in. By 2, Claire was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. Kevin and Marcus were let go, and Dana was offered a promotion. Franklin sat with her at the front desk later that afternoon, sipping a coffee and going over account options. "You were the only one who looked me in the eye," he told her. "I just treated you like anyone else," she said, shy. "And that," Franklin smiled, "is exactly why you'll go far." He left that day, not as the man they had kicked out, but as the man who reminded them of everything they'd forgotten. And across the city, in shelters and street corners, word traveled too, not about a rich man, but about one of them, who hadn't just made it, but made a point. His name was Franklin Mays, and no one would forget it again. Franklin didn't return to his shelter that night. Instead, he checked into the Lafayette Grand, the most luxurious hotel in the city, a place that once, not too long ago, wouldn't have allowed him to even step into the lobby without questioning him. The concierge greeted him with a bow. The staff fell over themselves to ensure his comfort, and he said nothing about what had happened earlier that day at the bank. He didn't need to, but in the quiet solitude of the presidential suite, Franklin stood before the full-length mirror, stared at the reflection of his weathered face, and thought about how easy it had been for them to erase him, not just from the bank, but from dignity, respect, humanity. And still, he hadn't shouted, hadn't cursed, hadn't broken down. He had let the truth speak for itself. But he also knew that wasn't enough. The next morning, Franklin walked into a small recording studio near Midtown. His longtime friend, Jalen, an independent documentarian, greeted him with a long hug. "I heard," Jalen said. "Whole city's buzzing." Franklin nodded. "I want to tell the whole story. Not just what happened yesterday, but all of it. You sure?" Franklin looked him dead in the eye. "I've been invisible long enough." Within 3 weeks, the story had exploded. Jalen's short documentary, "The Man They Kicked Out," was shared by influencers, business leaders, and even celebrities. It began with the footage from the bank's security camera, anonymously leaked by a remorseful intern. The grainy video showed Franklin being pushed out the doors, his duffel bag swinging awkwardly, his face calm but exhausted. It cut to a voiceover. They didn't know who he was, but more importantly, they didn't care who he could be. Then came Franklin's narration, powerful and low. "I spent 10 years building a tech startup no one believed in. I slept in my car for 2 of those years. When it sold, I walked away with $36 million. I've been homeless, invisible, and disregarded, but I've never been helpless." He spoke of the shelters he funded under different names, the grants he gave to struggling Black entrepreneurs who reminded him of himself. And finally, the humiliating day at Lexington Federal. The film ended with a simple sentence on the screen: "You never know who someone is until you treat them like they're nobody." Back at the bank, chaos reigned. Claire Peterson had been fired. Dana was promoted to branch manager. The CEO of Lexington Federal issued a public apology to Franklin, but he declined their invitation to return. "No thanks," he told a swarm of reporters outside the Ritz-Carlton. "I like banks that don't ask to see my wallet before they see my face." He had become a symbol, but Franklin didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to make change. 1 month after the incident, Franklin launched the Mays Foundation, dedicated to restoring dignity and opportunity to the unhoused and the unseen. He started with a $10 million donation and partnered with city leaders, some of whom had once ignored his calls when he was homeless. Now they scrambled to attend his press conferences, shake his hand, take selfies with him. He let them, for now, because he wasn't done yet. He met with mayors. He lectured at universities. He gave keynote addresses to bankers' associations that squirmed in their seats as he recounted what it felt like to be judged based on smell, clothes, and color. "You can't train empathy," he said once, "but you can punish its absence." And the most dramatic twist, he bought Lexington Federal, not just stock, control. Through a shell company, he quietly acquired shares, slowly, carefully, until the controlling interest tipped in his favor. The board, stunned, voted him in as chairman after the truth came out. At the first board meeting, he walked in wearing the same coat they'd thrown him out in, just so no one would forget. "I'm not here for revenge," he told them. "I'm here to redesign the way we see value." They listened. He disbanded the old executive team, promoted women of color, installed a new VP of ethics and inclusion, increased community investment programs by 300%, and on the first day of every quarter, he walked into a random branch homeless attire, duffel bag and all, to test their response. He called it the mirror check. Some passed, some failed, but no one forgot what it meant anymore. One fall evening, Franklin returned to the old shelter he used to sleep at on 7th and Morrow. The place had changed, cleaner, warmer, now partially funded by the Mays Foundation. He found Marcus there, the former guard, scrubbing floors. Franklin approached slowly. Marcus looked up, embarrassed. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be seen at all," Franklin said quietly. They stood in silence. "I was wrong," Marcus said. "I was just doing my job, but I know that's not an excuse." "It's not," Franklin replied, "but it's a start." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Marcus took it with shaky hands. Inside was a voucher, full scholarship to a local community college, along with a job placement referral. Marcus stared, eyes wide. Why? Why would you do this? Because someone gave me a shot once, Franklin said. And I remember what it felt like to be handed one instead of being shoved out the door. Franklin didn't go back to the presidential suite that night. He stayed at the shelter, talked to the people, listened to stories, gave advice, not money, laughed, cried. He wasn't there to be worshipped. He was there to remind them and himself that no amount of wealth could replace being seen. And long after the city stopped whispering his name in surprise, long after the headlines faded, Franklin Mays remained, not as a man who had it all, but as the man who had been kicked out and walked back in with his head high, still walking, still watching, still remembering. And he made sure no one would ever be invisible again. Continued in next part, building to full 9,000 words. Let me know if you want me to keep going. I'll pick up where we left off and continue the story in the same style. Bono annoy, Teep Chat GPT. Annoy. He never liked giving speeches, but now they asked him to speak everywhere: conferences, universities, government hearings. Franklin Mays, the man who'd been discarded, now sat on panels with billionaires and heads of state. But every time he stood behind a podium, he remembered that cold sidewalk outside Lexington Federal. The sting of humiliation didn't fade. He used it. At one event, a massive financial summit in Chicago, a young black student named Terrell raised his hand during the Q&A. He looked nervous, clutching a worn notebook and blinking hard beneath cheap glasses. "Mr. Mays," Terrell said, "how do you stay calm when people treat you like you're less? How do you not snap?" The room fell quiet. Franklin didn't answer right away. He stepped down from the stage and walked up to Tyrell, eyes never leaving his. "I didn't stay calm," Franklin said softly. "Not inside. I burned every day. But the key is to hold the fire, not let it burn you down. You hold it until it becomes fuel." Tyrell blinked fast, but this time it was from tears. Franklin reached out and handed him his personal card. "Call me," he said. "You won't have to walk alone." Months passed. The Mays Foundation expanded to 5 cities. He launched a housing initiative called Dignity First, converting abandoned buildings into warm, modern, long-term shelters with mental health services and job programs. No curfews, no humiliating rules. "Don't treat people like criminals because they're poor," he said in the promo video. "We don't fix suffering by adding shame." His name had become a movement, but success brought enemies too. A viral video surfaced grainy footage of Franklin on a sidewalk 3 years ago, arguing with a city officer. Right-wing media pounced. "Is this your hero?" the headlines screamed. Aggressive homeless man berated police. They tried to reduce him back down, back to that one moment of frustration. But the people didn't buy it, because they knew Franklin. He didn't hide from the video. He addressed it directly. "Yes, I lost my temper," he admitted on a national morning show. "I'd just been kicked out of a public restroom. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was tired of being treated like a disease, but that doesn't make me dangerous, it makes me human." Applause erupted in the studio. The host was stunned. Franklin just nodded quietly. His dignity had become unshakable. Meanwhile, at Lexington Federal, the boardroom had a new energy. Instead of stiff executives in power suits, Franklin filled the table with people who had once been invisible, formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs, immigrant women, veterans who had slept under bridges. One of them, Martha Reyes, had once worked 3 jobs and still lost her home. Now, she ran the bank's entire community equity division. "Don't give people a seat at the table just to say you did," Franklin had said. "Give them power, give them a budget, and then get out of the damn way." Under his leadership, Lexington Federal changed its hiring policies, removed discriminatory loan approval algorithms, and launched a radical initiative: no overdraft fees for anyone under $5.0 in their account. Traditionalists called him reckless. Investors panicked, but profits soared because people came by the thousands. Franklin had built the only major bank people trusted, not because it was perfect, but because it finally felt human. One day, Donna, now a regional manager, walked into Franklin's office with a strange look. "You've got visitors," she said. "Do I know them?" She just nodded toward the glass. It was Kevin and Claire. Claire was dressed in a plain gray blouse, hair tied back. No jewelry. Kevin looked older, shoulders slumped, his former bravado gone. Franklin stood slowly. "Let them in." They walked in, unsure of what to do. Kevin looked like he wanted to turn and run. Claire spoke first. "We came to say thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You had every right to destroy us, but you didn't, and I needed to understand why." Franklin leaned back, watching her. "I didn't do it for you," he said. Claire nodded. "I know, but you changed me. I work at a nonprofit now. Homeless Youth Services. Kevin volunteers on weekends. We didn't come to ask for anything, just to say we saw the mirror, and we didn't like what we saw." Franklin studied them both for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Keep doing the work. Not for me. For the ones who still get pushed out." Kevin swallowed hard. "We will." They turned to leave. But just before walking out, Claire turned back. "Franklin," she said, voice breaking, "I remember you said your name, and I scoffed. I didn't recognize who you were." He gave a small smile. "Now you do." Years passed. Franklin became more than a businessman. He became a legend. But he still walked the streets, still wore his old coat once a month, still tested banks and institutions. Not to punish them, but to teach them. One rainy night, he saw a teenager sleeping in front of a convenience store, shivering, wet socks, torn sneakers. Franklin sat next to him. "You hungry?" he asked. The boy nodded. They walked together to a diner. "What's your name?" "Dre," the kid said. Short for Andre. They sat, ate in silence. Franklin didn't ask for his story. He just sat there, present, real, when they finished. Dre looked up. "You some kind of preacher or something?" Franklin laughed. "No," he said. "I've just been cold before." He handed Dre a small card. It wasn't a check, not a handout, just a name, a number, a time. "If you want a shot," he said, "come to this address tomorrow. You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up." Dre took the card slowly. "What's this place?" Franklin smiled. "Somewhere people see you." And that was Franklin Mays. Not a hero, not a saint. Just a man who refused to let the world forget that people matter. Even when they're dirty, even when they're silent, even when they're invisible. Especially then. Because once upon a time, he had walked into a bank with $28 million and been kicked out like trash. And instead of staying out, he bought the building and tore the doors off, so no one else would ever be shut out again. Franklin often said, the moment that changed his life wasn't when the wire transfer cleared or when the ink dried on the acquisition of his first company. It was when a guard shoved him out the door like he didn't exist. That moment, painful as it was, etched something permanent into him. And instead of hardening, it clarified, it refined. He didn't need revenge. He needed reform. So he expanded not just his influence, but his impact. The Mays Foundation became a global name. Chapters opened in London, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo. His team created empathy labs that partnered with corporations to run immersion programs. CEOs who never touched poverty suddenly found themselves blindfolded, guided through shelters, sleeping in community bunks for 48 hours without cell phones or titles. Many wept. Others walked away changed. But not everyone was cheering. In high-level boardrooms, bold money executives scoffed, virtue signaling. They muttered, socialist fantasy. Others sneered. Franklin didn't argue. He didn't engage in shouting matches on television or Twitter wars with billionaires. He showed results. Lexington Federal's new model, rooted in dignity and community, had led to record customer retention and tripled their low-income user base without sacrificing high-value clients. In fact, new data showed wealthier clients appreciated the integrity. They brought in their friends, their families, because people wanted to be part of something good. Franklin proved you could be profitable and principled. But despite the accolades, the honorary degrees, the magazine covers, he stayed grounded. One evening, years after the bank incident, Franklin received a call from a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Mays." The voice was hesitant. "This is Andre. Dre, from outside the convenience store. You gave me your card a while back." Franklin smiled instantly. "How you doing, Dre?" I showed up at that address. They got me into the youth program. Said you paid for it. I just wanted to say, I'm graduating next week." Franklin leaned back in his chair, emotion catching him off guard. "That's good to hear, Dre. Real good. There's a ceremony. You don't gotta come or nothing. I'll be there," Franklin said, front row. That graduation was small. Just 15 students, most of them formerly homeless, or system impacted, or discarded by the world for one reason or another. But they had fought their way back. As Dre walked across the stage in a slightly oversized gown, he locked eyes with Franklin. He didn't wave. He just nodded. The same quiet nod Franklin had once given a bank full of people who'd tried to erase him. It was a new generation now, and Franklin knew his work wasn't over. Meanwhile, across the country, a rival bank tried to mimic the Mays method, launching what they called compassion banking, but it failed because they didn't believe in it. They saw it as a marketing stunt, a way to claw back public trust. They didn't understand the core of Franklin's philosophy. Dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right, and you can't fake that. So they floundered. And Franklin kept rising, not because he was chasing power, but because people were chasing him. They wanted to be near him, learn from him, follow him. Years later, when Franklin received the National Medal of Civil Honor, he gave a speech that was unlike any other. He didn't read from a teleprompter. He didn't list achievements. He told a story about a man with cracked shoes and a coat that barely kept out the wind. A man who stood in a bank lobby, hoping to be treated like someone worth talking to. A man who, when thrown out, didn't disappear, but came back, bought the place, and tore down the rules that let cruelty hide behind policy. At the end of the speech, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the original rejection slip signed by Claire Peterson the day he'd been denied entry. He held it up. "This," he said, "isn't a document of failure. It's a blueprint, because it taught me what not to build and what I had to protect." Thunderous applause. The president hugged him, but Franklin didn't stay for the gala. He flew home that night because Dre was starting his first job in the morning as a youth counselor at one of Franklin's shelters, and Franklin wanted to be there, not as a mogul, not as a millionaire, but as the man who once sat beside him on a rainy sidewalk. On his way home, the driver stopped at a red light in a part of town where people still slept under bridges. Franklin looked out the window, saw a man curled on a bench, same position Franklin had once slept in. He opened the car door, walked across the street, took off his own coat, and gently laid it over the man. No cameras, no press, just heart. And as he walked back to the car, the driver looked at him in the mirror and said, "You know, sir, I've driven for senators, kings. I've never seen anyone do that." Franklin just smiled. Then maybe they're the ones who should have been kicked out of the bank. They tried to erase him, but Franklin Mays became a name they built new systems around, not because he was rich, but because he remembered what it meant to be poor and never forgot. And when they kicked the black homeless man out of the bank that day, they didn't realize they had just opened the doors to a revolution, not with fire, but with grace, not with vengeance, but with vision. And long after the money was spent and the headlines faded, his legacy remained in every shelter that became a home, in every loan that gave someone a second chance, in every guard who stopped and listened instead of pushing someone out. Because Franklin didn't just build wealth. He built a world where everyone mattered, even the ones no one saw coming, especially them. Franklin never cared for fame. yet it followed him like a shadow. The more he tried to blend into the fabric of everyday life, the more his story glowed like an ember in the dark. People whispered about the man who rose from the streets and rewrote the rules. But to Franklin, that was never the goal. Change was, and change, he knew, was slow, painful, personal. That's why he kept visiting branches, not just his own, other banks too, grocery stores, apartment complexes, hospitals, places where policy often replaced empathy. He showed up as himself, grizzled coat, rough beard, worn sneakers. He wanted to see how they treated the forgotten when they thought no one important was watching. In one suburb, a landlord refused to show him an apartment. In another, a cashier followed him through every aisle, and each time Franklin took notes, not out of spite, but because he was building something new. A living index of how people reacted to perceived poverty, and more importantly, what changed when truth was revealed. He called it the Bias Mirror Project. The results were undeniable. Places that practiced true dignity saw growth. Places that clung to judgment lost clients, trust, and slowly relevance. The world was shifting because of one man. Back at the Mays Foundation headquarters, Dana, now vice president of operations, walked into Franklin's office, holding a letter. "From Dre," she said, smiling. "Wants you to read it." Franklin took the envelope, his calloused fingers brushing over the handwritten name. He opened it slowly. "Dear Mr. Mays, I still don't know why you stopped for me. I don't know what made you cross the street that night, but I think about it every single day. You didn't just change my life, you gave it back to me. I'm working with kids now, just like you said I would. Some of them remind me of myself, angry, lost cold. But I sit beside them, I listen, and I tell them about you, not the millionaire, not the bank guy, the man in the coat, the man who saw me. Thank you for not walking past. I won't either." Dre Franklin set the letter down, blinking away the tears. He didn't cry often, but some things reached too deep. Dana sat across from him, her eyes glistening. "You created a chain reaction," she said softly. Franklin looked at her. "No, we did. On the 5th anniversary of the bank incident, Franklin held a small, private event, not in a ballroom, not on a stage, but outside that same Lexington Federal branch. It was renovated now, new staff, bright mural on the side featuring portraits of real people, homeless, formerly incarcerated, immigrants, single mothers, all painted with dignity. They called it the Wall of Worth. Franklin stood before it as the sun set behind him. Around him stood those who had once been invisible. Dre, Dana, Marcus, even Claire, now a vocal advocate for inclusive policy reform. Dozens of others, some still struggling, some transformed. There were no speeches, no press, just candles, one for every person who had ever been cast aside, and one flame in the center. For the man who had walked back through the door, the world slammed in his face. As night fell, someone began to sing, a low, trembling voice, followed by others, a hymn of survival, a song not of sorrow but of strength. Franklin closed his eyes. And in that moment, he was not a man who had been kicked out of a bank. He was a man who had opened something far bigger, a movement, a mindset, a world. Years later, after Franklin passed quietly in his sleep at the age of 68, the headlines broke across the globe. Franklin Mays, the man who changed everything, dies peacefully. But it wasn't the news stories that mattered. It was what came after. Dre lit a candle outside the foundation headquarters and read aloud the final paragraph of Franklin's will. "Don't build me a statue. Don't name a street after me. If you want to honor me, then do this. Sit beside someone who thinks they don't matter. Look them in the eye, hear them, and remind them that they are not invisible. That's how I want to be remembered. In every moment, you choose to see someone others ignore. With love and fire, Franklin." They followed that wish. The Mays Foundation became the Franklin Network, a global organization that trained leaders, funded change, and embedded equity into institutions worldwide. But more than any program, it was the everyday people who carried Franklin's legacy. A banker who now offered warm coffee and respect to every person who walked in. A landlord who gave a man a second chance after prison. A cop who paused before reacting with force. A teenager who handed her only sandwich to someone on the bus bench. Each small act a spark, each one a reminder that no one is nobody. That worth isn't worn on skin or stitched into fabric. And that sometimes the richest man in the room walks in without a dollar in his pocket and leaves behind a fortune no vault could ever hold.